Hi, and welcome to today's episode of pianoTV. I am Allysia, your host, and today we are filming in the dark, so if the lighting looks a little different to you, that's why. I am staring at a very blinding light, so if I start blinking rapidly. Anyway, today we are going to be talking about melody writing tricks. And this video is going to be maybe a little bit technical, but we talked a lot about melody writing on this channel, and I wanted to do something a little bit more on the classical side, maybe a little bit more technical. And for those of you who are participating in our songwriting workshop basics course, which is in full swing now, then this will just further add depth to your knowledge with the melody writing and stuff that we're already studying. And for those of you who are curious about the course, this is kind of outside of the realm of what we're discussing in the course, but it's in the same ballpark, so definitely check out the course if you're interested. What we're going to do today is figure out what chord tones and non-chord tones are and why they matter in melody writing. We're going to look at 4 standard, easy to understand ways to use non-chord tones when you're writing a melody and how to identify them, and that's pretty much it. I'll walk you through them on the screen and the piano, and let's get started. The first thing we need to talk about are chord tones and non-chord tones in the melody. Say we have a tune like Old MacDonald, which is what you see on the screen here. This is a really nice simple example because you have all of the chords neatly laid out for you, like in the left hand, but also written up top, and it's in the key of C, so we don't have to worry about sharps and flats. When you have a C chord, so C, E, and G, like in the beginning, the notes of a C chord are that bar's chord tones, okay? So that means in the melody, that are, if you have a C, an E, or a G in the melody, then it's going to sound good. It's a chord tone. Those notes are going to work well. And you can see C, 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 G. Those are all chord tones, so they work with the chord. And I'll show you this on the keyboard as well, so you can hear what they sound like. And then we have more chord tones, F, F, A, C. I'm just kind of doing that in slow motion so you can see. And then C with the C chord, D with the G chord. So those are all chord tones, so they all sound good with the chord. So the melody notes work with the chords because they're chord tones. So a non-chord tone is a melody note that is not in the chord. An example of this is during the D minor chord. Your melody is going D, 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 C. Now C is not a part of a D minor chord, so this is a non-chord tone. But it's helping us get from point A to B. It's helping us walk to this next note. I'll show you what that sounds like on the keyboard. So we have B, I, N, J, O, and then we have. See, that C isn't a part of the chord, but it's helping us walk to the next melody note. So it works okay. It sounds good. Non-chord tones are used pretty commonly too. Melodies are mostly made up of chord tones, and then the non-chord tones are just sprinkled in there to link everything together, kind of like we just looked at. So if your melody only had chord tones, it would be boring because there would never be any steps, basically. The temptation is when you're writing a song is to stick only to chord tones since they sound good, but 3 notes, sometimes 4, depending on what your chord is, can be really limiting, and your melody is going to be less singable without some non-chord tones thrown in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend the rest of this video discussing several types of melody tricks, basically non-chord tones, and how they make a melody more interesting. The most common melody trick, and the easiest to use, is the passing tone. It's exactly what it sounds like, is when we pass from a chord tone to another chord tone. In the process, we're passing through a non-chord tone. So that's why I have these notes circled on the screen here in this Trini example. So our underlying chord and harmony is a G7. You can see that in the left hand. It's a G and a D and a B, and then our right hand fills it in with an F. So we have a G7 chord going on here. So our chord tones, that's a non-chord tone too. So our chord tones are the D and the F. And our passing tone is specifically this one because we're passing through, we're like on our way up. Passing tones are like when you're on your way up, or maybe you're going the opposite direction, going on your way down. Here's another passing tone where our harmony is now a C chord. So we're going from E to F to G. We're passing through F. So F is our passing tone. Here's what that looks like on the keyboard. So we're just kind of walking. If you hear those E's, the passing tone against the chord, it sounds kind of horrible, but it all works when you hear it all together because when you speed it up, you hear the regular chord tones, and then your ears don't really linger on those passing tones. So they add a little bit of tension, but we get away from them quickly enough that they still sound good. And without the passing tones, this would be nothing. That would be like if I erased all the passing tones, and it just doesn't have as much texture. Now, I don't want to overcomplicate things today, but I did want to mention that there are two different types of passing tones, accented and unaccented. So we were just talking about unaccented passing tones, and it just means we're passing through the non-chord tone on a weak beat. This is the easiest way to slough off a passing tone and have it sound good, because it's happening in between the beats. With that churny example, where our beat is, so you hear that F, if we're on a C chord harmony, is coming in between our beats, right there. Whereas an accented passing tone is the reverse of that. It means the off note is happening on the beat. So if I were to kind of flip that a little bit, that would be an accented passing tone. Well, one of those notes. You get the idea. What I have on the screen here is a better example of an accented passing tone. This is Alla Turca. And on and on. So those, the first beat and the second beat, so you have the passing tone is the first note in the pair. So because of that, it's sometimes these are a little bit harder to pass off just because of that. But they sound really, really good. And again, if you have a G minor harmony in the left hand, there's no C in a G minor chord or A. So we're resolving to a chord tone quickly enough that it doesn't offend our ears. You can kind of hear that in slow motion. So so hopefully that gives you an example. So we're passing through the notes, but they're the first notes, not the second notes, that are going to be the non-chord tones. It's just another way to do it. Basically, the least you need to know is that passing tones are critical to melodies. Without passing tones, our melodies would just, they'd never have steps for the most part. And music would only ever exist in leaps, and everything would just sound too nice. Next, we have neighbor tones. And neighbor tones are also pretty simple and straightforward. So instead of passing through a note on our way up or down, like C, D, E, or E, D, C, what we're doing here is we start on a note or a chord tone, we move up or down to a non-chord tone, and then we go back to the original note. So what you see on the screen here is C, D, C. So your neighbor tone is just, you're just like peeking in for a little hello. It's the next door neighbor of the chord tone. And again, we're not lingering on the neighbor tone long enough for it to sound bad to our ears. If we went and really like kind of emphasize that non-chord tone, it would start to sound bad. But we're just kind of quickly moving through it. And because of that, the non-chord tone works. And just like you can have accented passing tones, you can also have accented neighbor tones. And again, this is when the non-chord tone is on the beat. It's much less common, and it is a little bit tougher to use when you're doing melody writing, but it is something that you can do, and it is something that you'll come across. Now, this is from a chorale, but I can give you an example. If this is your beat, 2, 1, 2, and... So you can kind of hear, like, again, we're just passing through it so quickly that it doesn't really, like, it sounds good. So we don't need to use chord tones all the time like that. We can sometimes walk to non-chord tones and still have them work with our harmony. Then we have appoggiaturas, and I've done an entire video on them. They're a classic melody writing technique. The main purpose of an appoggiatura is to create tension and then release. So here's how they work. I have a Mozart example up in front of you. We have our chord tones. The V chord here is a G chord, so we have a G, a B, and a D. So these are all going to be our chord tones. Now you'll notice that with our appoggiatura, we have a melody note of a C sharp. It's a clashy non-chord tone, and then that resolves to a D. The held C sharp lingers and helps give us tension. And then we shift to D, and that gives us a release since it's moving to a chord tone. And another appoggiatura when we're over here is with the C chord harmony. So C, E, and G are our chord tones. We're lingering on this D sharp, and then we're resolving to a chord tone, the E. So you can hear that, like when you hear this, it's like, ugh, it sounds nasty. But it works because it's followed by a chord tone. So it kind of drags it out. And then we have the same thing. And again, it works in the context of all the music around it, but that's an appoggiatura. Appoggiaturas, as a rule, usually last about a beat before resolving. And then what they'll usually do is move a semitone instead of a whole tone. So you'll have C sharp to D instead of C to D. I don't know, maybe this is just because it's a little bit more dramatic. But again, as I already mentioned, the point of this trick is to create tension. Good music is full of tension. Without tension, you wouldn't appreciate easygoing chords and notes because they would just all get really samey and kind of boring. Classical music especially is full of tension. Much more tension actually than typical pop music. Much, because a lot of pop music doesn't even use things like diminished chords. So it's a lot milder music to listen to by comparison. And that is all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to get more into melody writing and songwriting and stuff, do check out our songwriting workshop basics, music theory for beginners course, which still has, as of the time this goes up, I believe there's still a couple more live Q&A sessions left. So get in on that if you want to. It's fairly affordably priced, and we're having a lot of fun so far with it. And I hope you enjoyed this video. I don't really think I have anything else to say. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye, guys.